that by the end of the century, we will have an additional volume of approximately 300 million of people becoming refugees solely due to climate change. This is something that no mechanism can deal with. This is something that you cannot stop with bullets, with mines, with barbed wires, with Frontex. You cannot stop it. Plays a habitat of unique importance for the entire Europe of its biodiversity, and especially for raptors and birds of prey. It was burning for 17 days and nobody could stop the fire. And the day the fire stopped, next day there was a huge flood in central Greece, Volos and then Thessalia. And a year after, there's still thousands of hectares in Thessalia that are still flooded. So this was a bell that was showing that climate change is not something that's happening only in Thailand, in Bangladesh, or in Central America.
So how does this idea exist in Greece between politicians? Is it that they're not open-minded, or is it just that they don't consider it as a serious threat?
The fact that as a global society we have not defined what exactly a climate refugee is, have not agreed on the definition. This does not mean that there are not millions of people displaced because of climate change. And this is a fact.
I found something very interesting, actually, that you also say that the countries are thinking of building walls, not protecting humans and so on. But at the same time, these very powerful and rich countries are responsible for creating the most emission, which impacts the poorer of the poorest people in India and Bangladesh and Afghanistan.
European and Americans need to find their own USP, their own niche, instead of complaining about China being dirty. So in this global, let's say, competition, let's have a competition about who emits less, who has the most efficient technologies, and who uses this technology for the goods of all, instead of just limiting it to the few that have the money.
Last image that I would like to show you is war and the climate change.
We're still talking about war and climate change, and not war because of climate change. That's the next thing to pop up.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Untold podcast. Today I have a pleasure of hosting Nikos Charalambides, the Executive Director of the Greenpeace, Greece. With over 3 decades of experience in environmental activism, he has been the driving force behind the Greenpeace efforts here in Greece to address the critical issues such as climate change, renewable energy, and marine conservation in Greece and internationally. Nikos has served as Executive Director of Greenpeace since 2002. During this time, he has written extensively on environmental issues, author of books and articles that explores the complex of sustainability and the role of civil society. In this podcast, we will discuss Nikos' personal life, his work in Greenpeace, the climate crisis, and climate refugees. Thank you so much for being here, Nikos.
It's a pleasure.
Athens is very, very hot these days, and how are you doing?
I'm suffering like everybody. And especially I'm thinking of people that have to work outside in the streets. After 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, it's not pleasant at all. So if you're a tourist, you have a choice. But if you're working out in the streets, it's a nightmare. And because of the extensive heat waves and the high temperatures, both at day and night, the material of the city, which is mostly concrete and asphalt, does not have the time to cool down, which means that even at night, temperatures are higher than 30 Celsius. Our bodies are in constant stress. If you have the luxury of having air conditioning in-house and you can afford the electricity bill, which is rising high all the time, you're lucky. If you're not, if you're excluded from that, you suffer more. So climate change and its impacts are not equally impacting us all. The ones that are excluded, the ones that do not have access to money, resources, solid well house, and everything, the ones that suffer the most.
I see. Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, this will be the focus of our today's podcast that will discuss climate change. And it has been some years that at least that climate change is in the center of political discussions. And it becomes very serious and, of course, very dangerous. The threat that is bringing to humanity and to the world as a whole. But before we discuss and get to the climate change and the topics that we will be discussing, please allow us to get to know you first in the beginning. If you could please tell us a bit about your background, family, where did you grow up, and just an overall background about yourself.
I grew up in Athens. My academic background was on physics. After physics and physical studies, I decided that I'm attracted by oceans and ocean life. So I moved to an MSc in France on oceanography and meteorology. This was mostly focusing on the physical aspect of the air and water movements, waves, circulation, but nothing with real marine life. So I had to go for a second one, which was more general, which had included biology, fisheries, chemistry, geology, so I had a wider picture. That was the academic background. While doing that, I was also involved as an individual into conservation efforts. I started actually as a young researcher at the university, that's ages ago, conducting a research on physiochemical characteristics on a specific bay in Greece, which happens to be the most important nesting site for the sea turtle, Caretta caretta, for the loggerhead sea turtles. That's how I met people working on conservation. I joined, I enjoyed, and I enjoyed every single moment from that time till today. So this is back in mid-80s. So that's ages ago, really, 40 years back. So my background on conservation and actually the clash between conservation and what we translate as development, tourism, and whatever starts from that time of the year. We had to find ways and build alliances in order to reduce the pressure from industrial tourism on the nesting beaches of the sea turtle, ending up with something magical, which was a combined effort by fishermen, hoteliers, local authorities, and eco groups to set a common set of proposals that were then translated into the terms of the National Marine Park of Zakynthos. So this was how I got involved in the eco movement as a hands-on person. Later on, there was an opening of a position on oceans campaign in ocean ecology in Greenpeace. A very good friend of mine invited me to apply. I did. I never thought that I would stay there for more than 1 or 2 years. It was an experience, a working experience, or what. It ended up now measuring, I think it's 32 years now. So I was wrong on how long I'm going to stay, but that's how it is. Truth is that the pre-Greenpeace steps were very crucial and it has helped me a lot, while Greenpeace has also helped me to grow both professionally and the way of thinking, political way of thinking, engaging in the political debates, generating political change, generating change in the market and everything.
Amazing, amazing. I'm curious, like, when was the starting point for you of being interested in environmental issues and try to get involved in this very complex issues?
If I try to go back 40 years ago, I think it was a question of values. It was something that was happening that was wrong to my value system, and I felt that I had to join forces or do something alone. Alone, there were very few things I could do, so I had to join forces with others and try and save the last nesting beaches of the sea turtle. That's how it all started. It was a question of right and wrong. Who's the weak that needs to be protected? Who's the one that has the power and is putting stress and is threatening the weak? The weak was the endangered sea turtle, which is now recovering. The population is recovering. The nesting beaches are in good shape. So from this point of view, it worked. And keep that in mind. No matter what you do in life, you definitely need, if you choose a way that is not a path that is not easy, you definitely need to have in the back of your pocket some victories, some successes, because you'll need them to get some energy, some power at the times of disempowerment, discouragement. There are many of that.
Yeah. I see. Before we get into the Greenpeace and the work that you do there, I would like if you could briefly describe the the climate crisis or the climate change. They refer to it differently. If you could, for the audience, just give an overall idea where this whole started and why this became very dangerous, at least in the past 10 or 15 years, that became very serious, and everyone, even in the center, it's one of the topics that's in the central political debates always. And is this threat really serious, and how serious it is, if it is?
That's a fantastic question. Allow me to go back to history. We know about climate change and why and how this works from the mid-70s. So most of the audience were not born at that time. We know that because it was the oil companies that have discovered that, and they then put it under the carpet, and they launched huge campaigns, PR campaigns, to cover up the whole story. Since mid-70s, we know that the use of fossil fuels, any type of fossil fuels, emit CO2 emissions, and these create the so-called anthropogenic climate change, because climate was changing, was always changing. It's not something new. What is new is the aggressiveness with which we produce this change due to the emission of CO2 and other gases and other related gases, active. Since 92, we have discussions happening at the UN level. At the United Nations level, we're discussing about the need for measures, global measures for climate change since 92. So it's not something that happened yesterday. It's not a shock that it caught us by surprise. The other way around is that we have 30 years of inaction. We have 30 years of talking and talking and talking and talking, while at the same time we keep on producing CO2 emissions. So we have not stabilized the situation. The situation is getting worsened. It's getting worsened. It's getting worse every single day. Even now that we have all these voices crying about, gosh, there's so much green things happening there. There's so much limitations in production, in development, and whatever. Even now, there is still increase in CO2 emissions globally. What does it mean? What this translates to? This translates to the increase of the average temperature of the planet. And this translates to more frequent and more aggressive extreme weather events. This is something that 30 years back, it was looking rocket science. It was looking at something, far away. Now it's not. If you see any type of figures, stats of the last 2 or 3 years, all around the globe, you go to the measurements of New Delhi a few weeks back. New Delhi having a sequel of 50 plus Celsius for days. Give me a break. This is not human. This is not normal. The amount of heat waves and the extension of heat waves you have is getting bigger. The amount of water, the precipitation that is falling, is still stable, but is falling in shorter periods of time, creating huge damages. And I would argue that in Greece, the really turning point was last year, when we had a wildfire burning the pristine forest of Dadia, which is a venue, a place, a habitat of unique importance for the entire Europe, of its biodiversity, and especially for raptors and birds of prey. That was burning for 17 days, and nobody could stop the fire. And the day the fire stopped, next day there was a huge flood in central Greece, Volos, and then Thessalia. And a year after, there's still thousands of hectares in Thessalia that are still flooded. So this was a bell that was showing that climate change is not something that is happening only in Thailand, in Bangladesh, or in Central America. This is something that's happening here too. It has victims, it costs lives, it costs money, it changes our lives, and we need to change in order to be able to fight it, in order to be able to adapt to that and see what we can do best. So coming back to the history of climate change, we've been losing precious time in discussing, talking, and not acting. The simple question, basic question is why? There's a Greek saying there's too much money. In our daily life, in our daily political, economic life, energy groups, and especially ones around oil, have a huge power, and they are also influencing decision making globally. This is not happening only in some oligarchies or in some countries where they have a very unique position. Let's say there are countries where 70, 80, 90% of the economy depends on oil, but there are countries where oil oligarchs are the ones that influence heavily decision-making, political life, and then. So they have good reasons to delay every measure that is going to be limiting the benefit, their profits. The solution to climate change, sorry for forgetting that, I assume that it was known, my mistake. We need to get as fast as possible away from all type of fossil fuels. That's it. There's no other option. There's no soft ways. The faster, the better. The faster, the cheaper. The faster, the less victims, the less impact. The slower, the more complex, and that's the path we have chosen so far, to go slowly, smoothly, and suffer a lot, and make it nearly impossible to avoid the most heavy impacts of it.
I see. Yes, actually, when I was preparing for this interview, when I started reading and doing some research, I started being extremely, how can I say, anxious about this, the threat that exists. I would like to specifically get to the Greenpeace work here in Greece and in Athens specifically. I would like if you could point out what have been some of the achievements that are some of the issues that the Greenpeace have addressed so far here in Greece regarding to these issues.
Since we're focusing on climate change because of the obvious heat wave that is hitting the city of Athens, and not just Athens, but also the entire of Greece and also the Balkans. If you see the maps show temperatures of 40 plus Celsius in big part of the Balkan Peninsula, which is not common. And I hope that it will not be repeated again and again and again, as we've seen happening. Focusing on climate change, I would argue that Greenpeace has been pioneer in raising the issue of climate change. I mean, we've been, I dare say, world banking on climate change for a decade alone. There was no discussion, there was no public debate. It was after 10 to 15 years of solo work that we've started having some traction within the academia, slowly within some politicians and also civil society. And there was also the findings through IPCC and other global organizations and bodies that came to help. So the initial part, I would argue that the fact that we are now talking about climate change and we take it as for granted that we need to do something, it's a result not just of the heat waves, but also of a strong and persistent stubborn political work of Greenpeace in Greece for long years. We didn't do just that. We also start talking about solutions. Greenpeace in Greece has started working on solutions and promoting solutions since '95. So at the time that it was rocket science to talk about photovoltaics, we've been introducing the first photovoltaics in the Greek market, framing and setting the standards for a new legislation that will allow them to be promoted and be widespread. talking about energy efficiency in the households, in the building sector, running pilot projects in schools or in other public buildings and showing how, especially at the times of the financial crisis, where people do not have the time and the money and the resources to heat or cool their places, their working place or their living places. We have helped build examples and pilot projects showing how you can do that in a way that is both comfort, it provides both comfort and it uses the minimum amount of energy through investments in energy efficiency, setting then the legal framework of how the state could subsidize energy efficiency measures at home, promoting renewables, pushing for renewables, biggest, small scale, medium scale. We introduced the element of justice and public participation on climate, not just about techno fixes and, big renewables and big wind or whatever, but also you and me as citizens being producer and consumer at the same time, how you can produce your own energy, introducing the term of energy democracy, introducing the legal framework for energy communities, how you can produce your own energy, not in order to sell it to the grid, but in order to reduce your energy bill. And that's part of the work we've been doing. We're now helping organize energy communities around Greece in order for them to gain more space in the electricity grid, and it goes on. It's a non-stop effort.
I see. Yeah, it's amazing that you're leading such complex and complicated and also difficult topic, especially when it comes to political decision making to be able to implement all these guidelines. Let's say that you would provide to the government. You mentioned that how successful the Greenpeace has been so far in trying to address this issue. I wonder how the Greek government has been supportive of cooperating specifically with the Greenpeace, and how that cooperation look like.
It's not easy. I mean, when you ask somebody who's trying something for 30 years, automatically the person, and in this case me, is talking about the success. We don't talk about the failures. Each success hides behind long years of failures.
I can imagine.
So there's the fact that we achieved that does not say anything about how many times we have failed or how many years we've been trying to achieve what has been seen as obvious. I would argue that it took us long years of lonely effort to explain that there's a global threat that's called climate change. It was not an issue in the public discourse, in the political discussion, anywhere. So there's lots of lost efforts, energy, and then it's not as easy as it looks like. At the end of the day, two things that are defining how fast you're going to achieve some political change. One is European legislation, so it's not just about putting pressure in the national government, but also reading and identifying opportunities in the political agenda at the European level and putting joint pressure with other Greenpeace entities in Europe in order to influence this legislation, which then will come back as a legislation to be implemented by the member states and Greece. That's what it's happening. I mean, big part of the environmental legislation in Greece is only due to European decision making. So we need to make sure that we maintain this as an ongoing process. So cooperation with all European colleagues and understanding of the political reality and trying to put and influence decision making at all levels. The second thing is you always need to have some open-minded politician at any political party that will understand that this is something that needs to be taken care of. So raising that in her agenda and become a kind of crusader and push it forward, no matter if it's easy, pleasant, or not, because several of these issues are not necessarily pleasant.
Excuse me to ask you a question about specifically you mentioned. I wonder some of the politicians, is it because of that they are, as you mentioned, that they're not open-minded about this, or is it just that they don't believe it and they're skeptical because they are people that they're skeptical of the threat of the climate change as a whole? They think that's just like conspiracy theory. So how does this idea exist in Greece between politicians? Is it that they're not open-minded, or is it just that they don't consider it as a serious threat?
I don't know if I can provide valuable statistics on that. What I can say is that for many politicians, this is something that was totally out of their spectrum. Their spectrum was unemployment, salaries, insurance, health system, education, other trivial things. So this was totally out of the spectrum. This was not in their agenda. They didn't understand why you talk about that while other urgent daily things are on their agenda. Probably there are others that could be more affiliated with oil industries or fossil fuel profit-related companies, but there's a speculation. There's nothing I can say on this. Truth is that there was very few politicians that were looking at climate change as a threat, as an imminent threat, and something that they show from the beginning or even later on. They understand the full spectrum, the full size of this threat, and the opportunity element also that this offers for new types of redefinition of development, redefinition of public participation, the role of the public, the need to rebuild and rebuild our cities, schedule our cities differently, how we can engage the citizens into that, how you can rebuild public transport based on the new reality. We're not there yet.
You mentioned also the role of public. I wonder how the Greek people are supportive of, or at least they consider or they think of climate change in day-to-day life, and what are the measures that they take? How do you see the Greek society when it comes to understanding of the climate change and so on, and being actively involved in this issue?
There's been several researches have been conducted during the last years. Some European ones, including, of course, Greece, but also others focusing in Greece, that were related on the level of understanding of climate change among the general public, but also in different groups and everything. It seems that there is a high level of understanding that this is a threat. This is not a joke. This is not something that some weirdos are talking about, and it's a threat that will come one day in the future, in the next century or whatever. So from this point of view, we're there. And it seems that the level of awareness is pretty high. When you get to what you need to do, there we have big issues. It seems that the picture is very dull, it's very gray, it's not clear of what an individual can do. And there's a role of the state that needs to make the clear distinction between what you can do as a citizen and what needs to be done by the state. For instance, you cannot change the whole energy system. You can, if you have money or you have a bill in the bank, you can get a loan and you can get a photovoltaic or you can get a battery. But this is as far as it can go. You can rebuild your house. If you are one of the few luckies that have the money, you can afford that. But this is as far as it can get. You cannot change the transport system. You cannot push for more means of public transport. You cannot push for electric trains and extension of the already old and impoverished and limited network that we have in the country. You cannot you can get your bottle and get your tea or your coffee with, but you cannot change the market of the single-use plastics.
I see,
so
yes.
There's a role of the state, and there the state has not been up to where it should. So the citizens are getting lost. That while they know that they see the problem, they feel the problem, they sense the problem, regarding what needs to be done, it's unclear. And to that, a big part of the blame is on the state that has not played and is not playing its role to the full extent.
I see. So, and Greenpeace particularly is it trying to address or to at least educate individuals or the Greek society of an individual basis what they could do. As you said, it's very complex, but it's like if there's any specific measurements or something that would help people to
Okay.
understand what they could do.
Uh, Allow me a longer answer. I missed the opportunity to explain how Greenpeace operates. Greenpeace is one of the particularities of Greenpeace is not just the direct action, not direct, non-violent direct action that we take from time to time against villains, in order to stop some environmental crime or whatever. It's also its political and financial independence. Greenpeace is not receiving European funding, is not receiving corporate funding, is not receiving donations from companies. So all of our money is coming from individual donors, citizens. So we have tens of thousands of people that are giving us 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 euros per year, and that's our whole income. So from this point of view, we have these thousands of people supporting us, understanding what we do and why we do it, and giving us money for continue or not. If they disagree, they say, guys, sorry, I'm not for that, I stop. So from this point of view, we have, let's say, direct access to several thousands of people that we somehow educate them. Through the way we work, we do not have the luxury of running extensive educational programs to schools and neighborhoods and whatever, except in very specific cases where we can afford, money-wise, resource-wise. We're also limited capacity-wise. So from this point of view, yes, education is part of what we do, not big part though. What we try though is to empower and inspire others to go on and do it in a more systematic way because they have the capacity, they have the means, they have access to necessary resources, and we provide all the times all the necessary understanding, knowledge, scientific background to go on.
I see. I would like to ask the audience and also encourage them to support the Greenpeace. I would like to also I will also attach the link for that information and how that they can support Greenpeace. I would like to also discuss the human aspect of the global warming or climate change, particularly focusing on the climate refugees. According to I'm going to read some data for the audience. According to Internal Displacement Monitor Center, since 2028, over 376 million people around the world have been forcefully displaced because of the climate change, which is floods, wind streams, earthquakes, drought, and so on. Which China and Japan and Philippines, over 10 million people were displaced. Indonesia, Myanmar, and Vietnam, 8 million people were displaced. Nigeria, Somalia, and South Sudan, over 2 million people were displaced. Brazil, United States, Mexico, 2 million people were displaced. Syria, Yemen, and Sudan, nearly 2 million people were displaced. I wonder how the Greenpeace, in general, how they try to address this issue, because this is affecting millions of people around the world, especially in these places that I read. So how Greenpeace is trying to address this issue?
It's obvious that there cannot be climate justice without justice on Earth. So these two things work together hand by hand. The fact that as a global society we have not defined what exactly a climate refugee is, we have not agreed on the definition. This does not mean that there are not millions of people displaced because of climate change, and this is a fact. Unfortunately, our political reality is different around the globe, and especially in Europe, but not only in Europe. You see the same happening in the Americas. We build castles and not open and protected ways for people to move safely from one place to another because of climate change. We give focus on building on fear. We build on fear, protection, castles, wires, mines, security forces, whatever, instead of providing safety and security for people to move safely from one place to the other. And this is something that we need to change. And this is not just something of Greenpeace, this is something that the whole society needs to understand. I would argue that while in Greece, especially after the 2015-16 big wave of refugees, mostly from Syria, but not only from Syria, there was a big change in how people were looking at the refugees. There was a big internal turmoil because the amount of people getting in and then, which resulted, if you remember, also in extreme right-wing voices building up and being presented, even neo-Nazi voices presented at the parliament. Nowadays, things are different, but still, we're, as a society, we're very cautious, we're very concerned about anything that has to do with refugees. No, we cannot, no, it's a no. There's a denial in dealing with any type of refugees. This has changed last year, where you had tens of thousands of people, internal refugees in Greece, because of flooded villages. In central Greece, you had villages that have been abandoned because it was obvious that people could not return back. And most important, even if they could return back, there was nothing to do there because their land was flooded. They could grow nothing. Their animals could not move around. So they had to move to build a new village. And this was a shock. This was half a century since this has happened to the country. So the internally displaced people because of climate change is something that we see it happening. We saw it happening in Evia after the forest fires. We saw it happening the year after the forest fires. So we need to move cautiously and understand the realities and see how we deal with that. So far, unfortunately, as societies, we're more into building barbed wires and fences rather than creating safe ways, safe pathways for people to flee and find a safer space. From our side, as Greenpeace, we are part of the global movement working with local initiatives, with native people, with local groups, trying to make sure that the green transition is also a just transition, and this is not something that is happening against the interests of local people, minorities, groups, and. And of course, this entails working closer together with humanitarian organizations.
I see. It was very interesting when I was specifically trying to find out all this information and get the data. I was curious which countries produce the most emanation in the world. And I found out that, for example, China is responsible for 30% of emissions, United States for 13.5%, India for 7% of global emissions, Russia 4.5%, and Japan for 3.5% for the global emissions. I found something very interesting, actually, that you also say that the countries are thinking of building walls, not protecting humans, and so on. But at the same time, these very powerful and rich countries are responsible for creating the most emission, which impacts the poorer of the poorest people in India and Bangladesh and Afghanistan, and also I read all these data. So I wonder, in terms of morality, what do you think that these people, like these countries or the leaders, do they feel responsible? How do you see that in terms of morality? Because I'm curious to see that they create the most emissions, but at the same time they create walls and they don't really, they don't feel responsible, or they don't support climate refugees or people that they are affected.
That's a very good question. Sorry for not having a satisfactory answer. Actually, if you go to the intro of your question, setting the data is even tougher, because the countries that now are portraying being the biggest polluters is part of the story. The other part of the story is the historic data. The historical contribution of China, for instance, is relatively low compared to the historic contribution of Europe or the UK or the US. Industrial countries have been industrialized for ages. Since the Industrial Revolution, they have been emitting like hell, and now they turn green and they say, okay, the others need to turn green. Whoa, you guys have been contributing to climate change for decades, and now you're shifting your economy. And what you need to do is provide all the necessary means and help and support to other economies to move directly to the new technologies instead of complaining that say we do not take any measures because for competition reasons China or India are dirty and whatever. So this is a game that's been played for years, and we need to change it. Interesting enough, China is now moving aggressively during the last years on green revolution, on the green technologies, and to the surprise of both European and American industries, moving much faster, much cheaper. So they, European and Americans, need to find their own USP, their own niche, instead of complaining about China being dirty. So in this global, let's say, competition, let's have a competition about who emits less, who has the most efficient technologies, and who uses this technology for the goods of all instead of just limiting it to the few that have the money. You're right also to say and to mention that there is a very bold unethical element on climate change. It hits heavily the ones that have contributed the less. I mean, the entire Bangladesh has a very low altitude above the sea level, assuming that part of the land is covered by sea. That means tens of millions of people have to move away, and they're not the ones that have contributed to climate change. They're the ones suffering. Not to mention small island states like in the Pacific that have already started moving and trying to find a safer place because the islands are disappearing. So yes, it's totally unethical, and all the big ethical states that finger point towards the dirty Chinese or Indians, they need to do their homework much better. They have done worse for ages, for years, for long years. They have been colonizing other countries. I'm not touching the sensitive issue of Middle East and how this has turned into a graveyard. And this is also having on its back oil. So yes, we, the civilized West, have created mess and havoc in the planet, and now finger pointing and telling others what they need to do, guys.
Yeah, thank you for concluding it that way. I have one more question regarding the climate refugees, and I would like to have your thoughts on that. United Nations has not yet passed the binding of resolution on recognition of the climate refugees. There have been some efforts towards that, but still it's not recognized yet internationally by international law. What are your thoughts on that specifically?
We're trying to avoid, as a society, as a global society, we're trying to avoid the unavoidable. I mean, there was, in 2018, there was a phenomenally shocking report by the European Union. I think it was by the European Environmental Agency that was estimating that by the end of the century, we will have an additional volume of approximately 300 million of people becoming refugees solely due to climate change. This is something that no mechanism can deal with. This is something that you cannot stop with bullets, with mines, with barbed wires, with Frontex. You cannot stop it. We're still putting our head in the sand, avoiding that, and as long as extreme right voices, nationalistic voices, xenophobic voices rule in parts of the world like in Europe, but also in America, it's going to be more and more difficult to go on and do the obvious, recognize the status, and build safe ways for people to move around the planet. Climate change is a unique opportunity to get us work together. There's no one that can be safe, and there's no one can be excluded from the impacts, or there's no one that can ignore the impacts because of what? And then, at the same time, we need to know that the measures that we need to take, the precautions that we need to take are different and need to be differentiated according to history, income, wealth, social position, strength, power, and. We need to work together, and we don't do it.
How do you see the future moving on? Are you optimistic?
I mean, I'm optimistic. That's why I'm working for Greenpeace for so long. I mean, if I was not optimistic, I would have quit and go for holidays until the
A
sun
wave would
dies. I don't
come,
know.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the nice mantras of Greenpeace is that um, I choose the optimism of action instead of the pessimism of thought, of thinking. There's good things happening. Even in a country where we love to hate, like Greece, we complain about many things. Greece is the country on earth that is moving is the fastest country moving towards decarbonization, getting rid of coal, not decarbonization as a whole, but closing down coal power plants. It's one of the top 5 countries globally on installation of photovoltaics. So things are happening. They already in Greece, that used to be dirty in its energy mix and whatever, more than 35% of its electricity is produced by wind and sun today, not in the future. So things are happening, things are moving. Just that it takes lots of effort, lots of failures, but also it needs lots of synergies, holding hands, working with others, identifying other players, other stakeholders, non-conventional alliances, workers, unions, elderly people, work together and get out of there.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Actually, it helps to hear that there things are happening, and thank to you and people like you that you are in the forefront of the activism and working on that. At this point, I would like to show you some images, and I would appreciate your immediate thoughts and reaction. The first image that I would like to show you is a bottle of water and a cup of coffee.
Yeah. We're producing. I think that a few years ago we did some kind of measurements, and I think we produce something like 2 million plastic coffee pots per day.
2 million per day.
2 million per day. I think that the plastic bottles we throw on a yearly basis in Greece is around 2 billions. It's phenomenally high. The effort so far is to collect them, is to increase recycling, which is a joke. It's a bad joke. Recycling is about, let's say, maximum 10, 14% of the plastic bottles thrown. Even if you double it, it will go to 20, 25%. What about the rest? The rest is single-use plastic that should never be produced, and we don't touch it. That's where the state needs to. I mean, I can do my self-contribution.
Yes.
I can have my bamboo or iron or nickel or whatever bottle with me, thermos or whatever, but this will not change the bigger picture. The bigger picture needs to change through measurements and policies by the state that will help subsidize and support industries to move to another packaging, and not just another single-use packaging, but a multiple-use packaging. We have a nice project that is running through the people. It's called Let's Meet at the Vrises, tap water, where you have tap water. And we have created an application. People, through this application, identify where they see tap water in public spaces, identify its condition, and you have a map of, now it's over 500-600 of tap water places around the country where you can get your water for free, which means that you need your thermos, you don't need a plastic bottle. I mean, the amount of tens of hundreds of thousands of plastic bottles that have not been used because of that, it's phenomenal. So instead of focusing on collecting plastic waste and trash from the beaches or from the bottom of the seas, let's never use them.
Just for the audience, this photo was taken in 2021, and this is a 81-year-old Greek woman that she was caught by the fire and her house was burned, and it became an icon for the global warming of the new century. What do you think about this?
It's not right. Having an 80 plus 80 plus old lady screaming and crying because her whole life is destroyed is not right. As simple as that. Let's don't fight about how much of this is part of climate is due to climate change and how much of this is due to incompetency of local authorities or the whole mechanism that is not investing on precaution. Let's agree that we should never see this picture again.
Yeah, yeah. I remember actually when this fire was taking place. I think it's the one that you referred that was burning for 17 days. I remember that I came out of my balcony and I saw that ash were falling off the sky, and that was like very scary to me. And I was like, that was the first time that I personally felt that's very dangerous what's happening. Another image that caught my attention when I was searching for images. This photo was taken in Kenya, the capital of Nairobi. When I found this image, when I was reading in 2000, this image was taken in 2021, which during the same year there was a drought in Kenya, and 1.4 million livestock were dead because of the drought. And
water is life. Water is life, and the way we use it is just wrong. There's little I can tell about Kenya out of the fact that there's big parts of the country are suffering from drought, and we need to find clever ways of using water. But if you see what's happening in our context here, where in semi-desertic islands we built more and more swimming pools. It's not compatible, okay? That does not mean that we don't need tourism, but this type of tourism is not compatible with a semi-desertic ecosystem. You see the same thing happening in parts of Sahara where you have all-inclusive big hotels with pools. Guys, where this water is coming from? It's coming from the closer oases, so it's drying the last cultivation of that. So let's see the impact of what we're doing. And when you're talking about Kenya and the amount of dead animals, you're not talking about an industrial farm in Denmark or in the Netherlands. You're talking about shepherds moving around with their animals, trying to find the last drops of water. So the impact to the economy and the life of these people and the livelihood of these people is huge.
And again, they're not responsible for creating all the emissions.
Yeah.
Last image that I would like to show you is war and the climate change.
We're still talking about war and climate change and not war because of climate change. That's the next thing to pop up. The next thing that you have is we used to have wars for resources that are responsible for climate change, namely oil. Middle East and the Gulf has been famous of fights about who's controlling oil rigs, transport of oil here and there. I'm afraid that the next era is wars because of climate change, because you need to have access to water, access and control of the very few areas that have been still productive. They're not desertified. To avoid that, you need to see the opportunities, and the opportunities is that the sun and the wind are for free and are for all. Nobody can control them. We need to work together. We need to share learnings. We need to share also the extra energy or the energy produced that is not consumed. We need to share energy storage technologies and techniques. We need to work together. And we need also to rebuild our societies and our cities in a way that will be readier, more ready to cope with the new reality of climate change. If not, we just fuel the next wars.
Thank you so much for your input so far. We are almost at the end of the podcast, and I would like to ask you some brief questions and brief answers. If you had the opportunity to change one law or policy in Greece, what would it be that?
I would start by implementing current policies. One of the biggest problems we have in the country is not the lack of is not the absence of laws, is the implementation of current laws. So let's implement what we have before trying to invent new ones.
Do veganism and vegetarianism help to alleviate the environmental crisis?
Yes, they can, especially vegetarianism. Let me do the distinction. First of all, it's scientifically proved, and this is already in the agreements, that we need to drastically reduce the amount of meat that we consume. This has huge impacts, both positive and negative. The positive impact is that there's going to be a reduction in the methane that's been produced by the digestive system of the animals, especially industrial animal farming. There's going to be a saving of hundreds of millions of tons of water that is not going to be used for industrial animal farming. So from this point of view, there is lots of benefits. We need to see the transition, especially for farming communities, people living out of that. And I'm talking about the industrial farming. I'm talking about people living out of that. What's the balance and how we can alleviate that? About veganism, it could. The reason why I'm a little cautious is that in the name of not using animal products, sometimes vegans are okay in using toxic or heavily chemical products, which is not a safe way forward. We need to find natural products that provide the necessary food, satisfy our ethical and value systems, and move forward.
Can climate change beliefs and advocacy become a form of political identity, similar to how religious or racial or cultural affiliations are leveraged for electoral advantages?
No, I think it's pure science behind climate change. It's pure physics and chemistry. There's nothing that has to do with a religion or something. You can, I think that you can do what needs to be done even if you don't believe it. It's not a question of belief. You don't have to believe on climate change. It's like believing on science. You don't believe on science. Science is there. It has its facts. If these facts are proved to be wrong, you change theory. But that's how people and society and a human race has been evolving. It's not about a belief. It's not about a religious thing. No.
Amazing. Nikos Charalambides, the Executive Director of Greenpeace. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for what you do. And thank you for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge with us and with our audience. I really appreciate it. And moving on, I wish you, your team success and everyone else, since climate change, of course, will affect everyone. So
I'd like to thank you for your unexpected invitation. I would like to thank you and congratulate you for the very wise and well-thought questions. I hope that I have helped some people get some better understanding of climate change and why this is something important, that's something of interest to us on our daily lives. And also, I hope that I have given some idea of what each and every one of us can do in order to alleviate part of the pressure that's on us all.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again. And everyone, thank you so much for watching this.